Okay, so I saw such an interesting tweet on Twitter today. THD came up with this tier list for a bunch of different systems and like what his general thoughts on them were. And so I sat here and looked at this and I was like, I'm in dire need of content. And you know what? This looks like a good time to tier some stuff that is not controversial in the slightest. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be tiering a bunch of different systems across like the game's history, from things like artifact weapons to things like Cypher, the first ones, and just talking about like their impact, what I think about them, and just kind of tiering on how much fun I think that they were. For me, I think generally looking at this, like my S tier is going to be just like top tier stuff, made the game substantially better, like the absolute best of the best. A is going to be like great systems that they had implemented. And then B is like good systems, but I think that they can have some like pretty substantial flaws. But I think in general, B is going to be like pretty good systems. C is like middling systems that are like probably fine more often than not. And then like D, not great. And then F is like, this is actively making the game worse. I think that like the F tier is like, okay, this made the game worse for it just by having it implemented into the game. Okay, so I'm going to start off with artifact weapons. So I think that artifact weapons had a lot of problems, but I think that they were also pretty decent. I think maybe good but flawed, or middling, I think is probably a good spot for artifact weapons. I'm going to put them at good but flawed, and I think that actually describes them pretty well. So the deal with artifact weapons is like the artifact knowledge system just in general really held these back. Not that the weapons themselves were bad. So if I was just ranking the weapons by themselves, I would probably put them in A tier. But the fact that the artifact knowledge system was also something that was tied into this, I'm going to end up putting it probably in B. Ashran. I did not like Ashran as a whole. I thought that it actively made the game worse in Warlords of Draenor. Admittedly, I'm not a massive PvPer, so this is not something that... I mean, I do PvP from time to time, actually fairly regularly, depending on the season, so I thought Ashran was pretty bad, and so I think it actively made the game worse. Azerite armor. So I think that Azerite armor did not actively make the game worse, but I do think it was just an overall pretty bad system. Just having to regrind it every single season. So the powers themselves sometimes would be pretty decent, which is what's keeping it out of F tier. But I think that overall the acquisition process, specifically on a bunch of these, was pretty bad. Badge vendors. Shout out to PvPers. That thing is going to go probably into F tier. Generally, just the honor grind itself. I think that badge vendors by themselves can be okay. I think that just the state of like where like PvP honor has been for a while is, it puts this not in a great spot. Bintha gear made the game worse. No questions asked. Mana pearl farming was horrible. BFA mission table, middling to no opinion. You know, I didn't feel too strongly about this. Then we have the Brawlers Guild. I like the Brawlers Guild. I think the Brawlers Guild is overall pretty good. I would put this in the great tier. I don't think it's like S tier for me. I think that there are some other things that are like, oh my god, this is some of the best stuff that they've ever implemented into the game. This is the future of gaming kind of thing. The future of World of Warcraft. I think the Brawlers Guild is fairly solid, but it's not that. I mean, it's fun to do whenever it comes out. Whenever they refurb it and add new fights is always fun to do. But there's no like... In my mind, there's no real replayability, that kind of thing. Challenge modes, I think, were S tier for me personally. I did them in Warlords of Draenor. I unfortunately didn't get to do them in Mist of Pandaria. So the downsides on CMs, for at least in my opinion, is that the replayability wasn't exactly that high unless you were seriously grinding like rank 1 times, which at that point it is still pretty good. But I think overall, challenge modes are fairly solid. Chromie time. This is like the time walking leveling thing. I thought that this was the Chromie scenario at first. I was like, what a weird thing to have here. But this is like the time walking leveling thing. I think for me, this is going between like great and great but flawed. I think that I would probably end up putting this in like great tier. I think that just the ability to be able to level through all the old zones. So you can level through Kata if you want, or you could be like me and level through Warlords of Draenor because it's the fastest. That kind of thing, I think, is pretty solid. Conduits. We're going to have to get that in F tier. I think that conduit energy specifically is going to be one of the biggest reasons I put this in F tier. In addition to that, this is very uninspired. Just one of the worst, one of the worst things ever. Okay, so corruption. There was also the N'Zoth legendary cloak. Okay, so these are two separate things. So corruptions and the N'Zoth legendary cloak are separated in this. So I have to kind of look at them as unique systems. I'm gonna put the N'Zoth legendary cloak in F tier. Also, horrific visions are in here somewhere. Wherever those are, I should probably also grab those and rank them at around the same time that I'm ranking these. Perfect missions and N'Zoth. So, okay, so I'm going to put legendary cloaks in F tier. There was a time where the legendary cloak would take you 12 weeks to catch up with other players, and I thought that just like the general catch up on the corruption resistance for the N'Zoth legendary cloak was horrendous. I thought it was actively bad for the game, and in the legendary cloak, just the corruption resistance catch up made the game worse and made it very difficult for you to play alts. Horrific visions of N'Zoth. I actually thought that these in isolation were, I would say, good but flawed. I think that the fun side of the horrific visions of N'Zoth, especially optimizing the 5 mask, was pretty fun. Feeling forced to do it later on in the patch was not exactly the greatest feeling, but I think that like really early on, these were fairly solid. Corruptions. God, I don't even know where to put corruption effects. I think, man, I think that these have to go into C tier. So they had a lot of upsides just generally. I thought that they made characters feel fairly strong. But I think that they were a balancing nightmare, and acquisition was a main concern for me. So having to shell out infinite amounts of gold on the auction house or swipe your card to purchase a lot of corruption BOEs was incredibly annoying. They also didn't have like a corruption vendor for a while, and so I think that this probably belongs in C. The upsides of corruption were very good though. Like they did make your character feel really cool. Min-maxing the amount of corruption you had relative to the corruption resistance was also something that was sick. Customer support. Covenants, this is the top of F for me. The no covenant swapping thing was awful. Very, very bad for the game, in my opinion. Essences, I think that essences were good but flawed. So here's the deal. There was no account-wide essences for such a long time, and so that's the major flaw with the system. But in general, I thought that the way that essences would change up your build or change up the way that you were playing was more often than not pretty fun. I didn't like having to reform this on alts, though, and then that was the major flaw of essence powers just generally for me. But I thought that they were pretty fun. I think that this may be a bit controversial. All right. Garrisons. This made me a lot of gold. It's made me a very rich man. How do I feel about this? Is the Warlords of Draenor Garrisons. I'm thinking that this should probably go in C tier. I don't really care too much about it either way, upside or downside. So the upside of the Garrisons is like maybe a lot of gold. The downside of Garrisons, there was that random, oh wait, the WoD mission table is separate from Garrisons. Oh shit, hold on, let me rethink this. I think that Garrisons were not great. I think the WoD mission table was mid. So I think that Garrisons, they had a lot of things that weren't going for them super well. I think that they were I think that they could have been implemented a little bit better in regards to what they provided. I think the WoD mission table made me a lot of gold, but it wasn't exactly phenomenal. I guess I would also classify that weird what was the table? The boat table. It was a WoD mission table, which I still don't know. The boat table was still one of the most jank things ever. Glyphs. Oh god, old glyph system. Let me think. I think that old glyphs I don't care about. I'm gonna put them in C tier. They're fine. Like there were some that were cool. Most of them just ended up being aesthetic more often than not. You ended up having like glyphs that were pretty solved. I didn't really care too much about them. Is this Mechagon hard mode? If this is Mechagon hard mode, I'm going to put this in A tier. I thought this was actually really fun to do. In addition to that, they gated the Vision of Perfection like rank 4 behind the hard mode stuff. That was sick. Actually, I did not mind hard mode. I'm gonna put that in A tier. Island expeditions. God. This is my personal hell. I did not like island expeditions. I would get stuck in prison. Okay. Item levels. I'm so okay, let me think about how to rank this. I think that item levels are good for the game. I'm gonna put them in good but flawed. So I think that for some players, they're gonna get upset because like item levels, oh yeah, they're gatekeeping. But I think that like overall, item levels are like a pretty quick way to just like look at somebody's character and be like, oh yeah, this is fine. I think this is B. I don't think this is like super like something that you need to really think about too heavily. Legion legendaries, God. If there was ever a system that was good but flawed, acquisition of Legion legendaries, especially pre the last season, awful, atrocious, really flawed. The effects, sick, made my character feel powerful. I was super happy with them. Good, but I think that Legion legendaries embody good but flawed. Maybe some of the top stuff here of good but flawed. Legion mission table. You know, I think that this can go with the other mission tables. All three of the mission tables are like, all right, these are fine. These are fine. Looking for dungeon. Looking for dungeon and LFR. Let me think. This isn't the same as LFG. This is the queuable one, is what this looks like. I think that both of these I'm going to put in D tier. It's weird because I actually think that they both make the game worse in some aspects, but I think that they're good for the game in other ways, right? So they give people access to like the content. But I do think that they make the game worse in a lot of different ways because like it's an MMO, and so you should kind of have to interact with people. But in a weird way, like it's also nice in some aspects. So I don't think it's going to be an F tier for actively made the game worse, but I think it's like not great. M plus cash. I don't think it made the game worse. I think it was just like not a great system. So I'll put that in D. Mage Tower, S. That thing is lit. That was super good. Mr. Pandaria farm. Let me think. I don't think I have too much of an opinion on Mop Farm. I think I'm gonna put this in probably C. This is like mid. Mop Legendary Cloaks. I think that this kind of ran into the same issue of like the N'Zoth Legendary Cloak of like in like the WoD Legendary Ring. God, let me think. But I thought the Mop Legendary Cloak was like a lot of fun at the time. I'm gonna put the Mop Legendary Cloaks in good but flawed because they were a lot of fun. This is making me like maybe reconsider the N'Zoth Legendary Cloak. But I put the Mop Legendary Cloak in the good but flawed category because even though this took a lot of time to farm, I think that it still was like a pretty good thing. Same with like the WoD Legendary Ring. I guess I'm gonna put this in good but flawed as well. M plus. I'm gonna put this in S tier. Like M plus has a lot of. I think that it is almost unfair for M plus to be in a tier list ranking like this. It's like putting raid or PvP in here, and it's like I don't think it's super fair to put M plus anywhere below S. So there are things that M plus does wrong. And it could warrant being in just like a lower category, probably the great category if I had to say something else. But like. At the same point, the amount of replayability and the real push into being one of the core junctions of like in-game content is, I think, something that's like very important for M+, and I think that putting it anywhere below S is just not fair. Need Before Greed. I'm glad that it's coming back. I think I'll put this in A tier. I think it's like somewhere between A and B. This is like really interesting. I'm glad that it's coming back. I think it's nice for a lot of different players. I think that there are very few downsides to it as a whole. At the end of the day, it's just a way that loot works. And so, you know, it's fine. The Netherlight Crucible. This is in D tier. This thing was bad. It was the if you guys don't remember what this was like the the weapon thing that you would get from Antorus. You would get like the damage dot proc or like mastery plus avoidance things, and you would have to go interact with them in another like Crucible. New talent system. Okay, let me think about this. So is it talking about the Dragonflight talent system or like the new talent system? I think that it's talking about the current talent system on live versus the old talent system like pre-Kata. So the new talent system, I think that this is probably going to go into C for me. Now, the old talent system, I think that the new talent system is fine, but I think it's flawed in a lot of different ways. And I think that it does not, like, it's not fun enough for me to put it any higher than this. Like, it's fine in a lot of situations, but I don't think it's like, oh, my hot dog talents. Old talent system, you know, I think that I'm probably going to also put them in B. Like, there was a lot of good stuff with the old talent system, but there's a lot of bad stuff as well, specifically, like, having the ability to be able to talent multiple specs of Mage at the same time or multiple specs of Druid at the same time and like really customize your loot. Like your loadout is nice, but at the same point, like I don't know. I think that the way that Dragonflight is going to be looking at the new talent system is going to be a lot better. Particularly looking in this like A to B range. Yeah, this A to B range. I think the new talent system is going to be looking at that. But I think both of the ones that we currently have are like C. Yeah. Order halls. Oh, I like order halls. I thought the order halls were sick. Maybe this could be a bad take, but I'm going to put the order halls in like... Put the order halls in like A. Yeah. Pathfinder. I don't really have too much to say about Pathfinder. I'll put this in D. Personal loot. Oh, I'm gonna put this in D. I think this is what... Where did I put Need Before Greed? I put Need Before Greed in A. Let me think. I think that personal loot is fine. Hear me out. So I think that personal loot is fine. I think that personal loot runs into a lot of flaws of So this is the issue that I'm running into right now. So Need Before Greed and personal loot run into the same problems of like acquisition and the amount of loot that's dropping in the game. And there's the fact that there's no deterministic loot in the game. So is personal loot bad? Or is the acquisition process bad? I think the acquisition process is what's actually holding personal loot back. I don't think it's necessarily personal loot in a vacuum. I'm going to leave this in C, and I'm going to put Neba Greed into B. I'm going to bump this down a little bit. PvP cache, horrible. One of the worst ideas that they've had. I'm going to put this next to M plus cache. The fact too that like only very specific pieces of Azerite came out of PvP, and so you'd be forced to PvP for the PvP cache was atrocious. That had to be one of the worst systems. Kind of similar to M plus cache, where you just had to high roll like whatever specific item you were looking for from dungeons, and it could be like Gig Abyss. Awful. PvP vendor, which is not to be confused with the like honor farming. I think that the PvP vendor is a decent system. I actually don't mind the ability to be able to purchase very specific pieces with conquest. Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind being able to purchase very specific pieces with conquest. PvP vendor upgrades. Okay, now this is like not a great system. This is another honor gating. Like it's very difficult to. Oh, is this time walking badge vendors? Oh, wait, is it? There's no way this is time walking badge vendors. This has to be honor. But this looks like time walking badge. I think that time walking badge vendor is probably going to end up being like, I don't care. Probably it's like C. PvP vendor upgrades. I think this has to be F because this does not make sense. So I think that PvP vendor upgrades has to be F. Reforging, never really cared for it. I think that this is like a middling system. I know a lot of people, and this is going to be a hot opinion, people hate, people really want Reforging to come back, but I think that, in my opinion, stats aren't meaningful enough for Reforging to come back and for me to care. Like, straight up, I don't care. Rune Forging. I think that the fact that it only interacts with one class specifically is enough for me to put this in like C tier. I don't care. Scenarios, I think scenarios are decent. I think they're good but flawed. I think that scenarios, like, they're non-repeatable content. There's a lot of downsides to scenarios, but I think that just in general, like, for storytelling elements or just for fun, scenarios are fun. Shadowlands legendaries. Substantially better acquisition process than Legion legendaries. In my opinion, they were less fun than Legion legendaries because they were less strong. I think I'm going to put this in B tier. I think these are fine. So like the crafting process is okay. The stuff that's surrounding them. So Torghast is here in isolation. We can just slam this in F. This is the worst system, one of the worst systems I've ever made. So the stuff surrounding the Shadowlands legendaries was pretty annoying. Like how to get them, the acquisition process for like Flux and Soul Ash and stuff like that's pretty annoying. But I think the legendary effects and then like the fact that they allowed you to wear 2 legendaries later on in the patch was pretty decent. Shadowlands mission table. It's going with the other mission tables. I could not care less. Shards of Domination. F. Shards of Domination and Torghast actively made the game worse in ways that I did not think it was possible. Shards of Domination was a system that was like multi-layers of RNG without the upsides of tier bonuses and did not have any transmog or anything like that. Yeah. The Great Vault. I'm going to put this in B tier. I think this is a great system, substantially better than the M+ and PvP caches that we had previously. I think that it's still a flawed system in the sense of like it doesn't provide any way to have like deterministic loot. And so I don't think it's like perfect, but I think it is a substantially better system. I don't mind this. Tertiary stats. I'm going to do a D. I find more often than not tertiary stats are more of an annoyance than anything else, specifically with how powerful Leech and Avoidance both are. They end up being too good for like such a proc. In addition to that, sockets also fall into tertiary stats, and while you can obtain sockets through like the Great Vault, it's not something that is too good. Threads of Fate. I kind of like Threads of Fate leveling. I thought that this was good. I think that this will go in A tier for me. Tier sets. I'm gonna go S tier. Not so the Mog is good. I think the tier bonuses that they normally bring back are pretty solid. Transmog. I'm not much of a transmogger, but I do think the transmog is ultimately very good for the game. We're gonna put that in S tier as well. Time walking. I like time walking. I think that time walking is probably. I'm gonna go with an A tier activity for me. I think that's really casual. It's like a really casual activity. Actually did not mind time walking M+. I thought that was kind of fun. I didn't enjoy being forced to kind of grind loot that was only on like a 1-week window. I think that time walking just in general is like a pretty solid idea. Titan Forging. Jesus. I didn't like Titan Forging at the time. Let me think. So here's my thought process. Whenever Legion was current, I really did. And when BFA was current, I really did not like Titan Forging at the time. Then when it left, I was like, this loot system we have is way worse because they cut down the amount of loot that you got whenever they removed Titan Forging by a substantial amount, which meant that you could never basically have the items you really wanted. So they punished you for it. Did that make Titan Forging a good system? I don't think so. I don't think that it made it a good system. I'm going to put this in D tier. I think it's not a great system, but I don't think it's actively bad for the game. Warfronts, maybe one of the worst systems I've ever dealt with. I could go ahead and never interact with those again. World quests, it depends on the kind of world quests. I think that like any artifact power kind of world quests were bad. Not good. Anything that gated power behind it, those world quests were not great. I'm going to put these in D tier. I think that world quest got a lot better with Shadowlands, just generally. Funnily enough, because most of Shadowlands systems are seen as pretty bad. But I thought that world quest got better with Shadowlands just generally, so I was going to keep that out of F tier. But I think that like the artifact power grind, all the various AP grinds that we had was not great. Daily quests. I'm gonna put this in C. I don't care. I think that any amount of daily quests are more often than not fine. I think it depends on like what daily quests these are. I think these are talking about like old daily quests like Mystic Pandaria, prior to Mystic Pandaria kind of daily quests. Flex rating. I think that flex rating is I think good but flawed. So I think that there's the issue of like there's something with raid size just in general and like heroic flex rating that I think that there's something with flex rating that is really good, but I think ultimately it's going to be a flawed system. There's a reason that Mythic ended up locking at 25 players, right? The old 10-25 man stuff, I kind of wish that I could go back and raid 10 man in like a serious capacity, right? Not like go play on Classic, they're completely different. Like I wish that I could go raid 10 man in like a really serious capacity because that feels like that would be a lot more fun. But at the same point, M plus is a thing now, so it's like it kind of gets that itch for it. Paragon reps. I don't really care for Paragon reps. Like they're fine. I think that I'm gonna put them in C tier. I understand that people grind them for like mounts, and they may like the mounts that Paragon reps have. For me, it's never been something that I'm like super into. I think that grinding Paragon reps pretty annoying. Professions. I'm glad that professions are getting a rework. How do I feel about them as a system as a whole? I think that professions, especially since the dawn of time, have been good but flawed. We're going to put them there. Weapon skills, bad. I don't want those. Pet battles, I'm going to put those in D. I don't think they're actively bad. I think that weapon skills are actively bad for the game because like having to train weapon skill just generally is something that like it just doesn't fit with like the modern World of Warcraft game that a lot of people play. Pet battles, I think that this is a system that was just dead on arrival. I don't think that they got really reiterated on. I don't know how to make pet battles better. I don't think that like this is just like not a great. It's not a great system. Is it actively bad for the game? No. I'm sure there's some people that are like, oh my god, pet battles are my favorite content. I'm sorry. I apologize for your content. Creation Catalyst. I think that the downsides of Creation Catalyst were that it cost way too much flux. I think the upsides of Creation Catalyst is that it got people tier. I'm really heavily contemplating putting this in A tier, even though that it had major downsides. I'm going to put this in A tier because this is my tier list. I think that even though it had major downsides of costing way too much flux, I think that it was still pretty good. Cypher the first ones. I don't think that there was a system. Like, a lot of these systems, I could not care less about. Cypher the first ones, another one. Valor/justice points. Valor points. I think good but flawed. I think it's a good idea, but it's flawed in the sense of like the valor being capped a lot of the time. It's not a great system. But I think that valor point vendors being able to target loot is nice. Yeah. Because it's talking about the vendor specifically. Okay, yeah. I think this is my tier list. All right. Goodbye.